Cheers! Vision denial. Hello, yeah, this is vision denial. And clearing vision. MSI 2022. My name is Sam. I've watched every playoff game from every region that's qualified. Yes, including that one. And today, it's the day one of groups of MSI 2022. Don't let the lack of energy that I put in really sell the enthusiasm, because this was an okay day. I liked today's games. Today's games really brought me some surprises, some expectations met, and others not so met. A couple of things to go around. For those who don't know or don't pay attention to the stream itself, they're on patch 12.8, as well as the LPL representatives, Royal Never Give Up, are playing remotely due to the conditions / lockdown that happened in Shanghai that would have prevented them the opportunity to isolate for the period of time that was necessary. I think this is the last time I'm going to mention this on this channel for the moment in time being, because I've said it enough times that at this point people are pretty aware of it. That said, I'm fairly surprised by some picks, not so surprised on others, and genuinely curious as to why some teams have opted to stick to certain picks. So, let's go down the list of the games that played. Starting with T1 versus Saigon Buffaloes. And T1 showed a lot of disrespect in this early game. The 2v2 especially down bot. And while they finished at around the time people expected, the usual 25-minute mark, the 25-26 minute mark, Saigon Buffalo showed that the early game T1 operates under is flimsy at times when they don't show the adequate respect to actually play under the kinds of drafts they work with. That said, it also showed that any little mistake becomes a ballooned issue very quickly, as T1 is incredibly efficient with any lead they bring forward. Those are my quick thoughts after watching this particular match. So let's take a look at what that show's like. Well, let's take a look at this goal graph over here. As you can tell over here, Saigon Buffalo got the first blood and the first Drake roughly around the times that they needed to, as well as the first turret. So a lot of the early game here was definitely not super in control of T1, right? They had a goal deficit on many occasions, including a 1K deficit from the Buffaloes. But the issue here is that the Buffaloes were not able to capitalize on any of the mistakes made by T1, while as T1 ballooned any significant mistakes to a point that was unplayable for the Buffaloes. And to me, right there, shows a lack of, how do I put it? Shows a lack of understanding of how to navigate these particular leads and pitfalls from the Buffaloes. It was kind of expected, but they are a strong early game team and did punish T1 in the ways that was expected at this current point, or at least T1 played under a manner that really shouldn't be expected of a team of this caliber that should have a bit more respect, just at least for the moment, as they bring their bearings and understand all of the teams and how they work. So, next, let's look at. Up next, we've got the Latin American representatives Team Ace versus Japanese representatives of the LJL Detonation Focus Me. And by far, this game went as expected. Detonation Focus Me played fairly expected, rough around the edges, and very aggressive early game. All the while, I was surprised how little they attempted to balloon the lead, as the solo laners of Ace were just passively gaining gold and scaling. That said, Ace just took it and made very little moves to punish or be proactive during the game, leading to easy catches and collapses from Detonation. Focus me. If you have a lead in a lane, you need to move it somewhere to balloon it and relieve the pressure globally at any given point of the game. Honestly, just so surprised. So what do I mean by that primarily? Well, taking a look at the gold graph over here, and specifically an aspect of this gold graph that is not being shown is in the situation where Lonely on his Rumble had full control of the lane at any given point. And yet somehow, where this gold graph shows only control from the gold and tempo lead by Detonation, focus me, nothing was done around the map to like gain anything. Right? Like Ace managed to get plates in the top side solo practically, but it led to nowhere on any front. And Detonation focused me having a stronger understanding of how to like really take those leads and capitalize with it. Just went along as Team Ace just stared as the full base and their full attempts at doing anything just crumbled around them. And I really hope that this doesn't follow their the way that Ace will operate for the remainder of the games. It's just real unfortunate that the group that they're under, they're going to be under more teams that are stronger in the early game and equally know how to balloon their early game leads, that it's going to be really rough to see them, if this is up against Detonation Focus Me, how they're going to fare up against either the Buffaloes or T1. Up next, we got Order versus of the Oceanic region versus G2 from the LEC European region. Honestly, Order played an early game approach that some may not have seen coming. Just some. Leading to G2 having no ability to snowball or balloon any kind of lead they would have gotten early in. That said, Order also didn't utilize the style of composition or any of the leads to push any advantage that could have been worthwhile. As for G2, they would punish Order for a ballsy Baron play, and the gold lead from that punish was enough for G2 to show what they have and really snowball the game in ways that Order couldn't have navigated while in the dark. It was such poor vision play by Order, but such incredible vision denial by G2 as well. So let's take a look at what that looked like on the graph here. So taking a look at this gold graph here, you can tell exactly the moment. And weirdly enough, it's at the 20-minute mark, right? Super easy. And there's something that's super misleading also by this gold graph here. G2 has full control of every first blood, first turret, and objective across the game, and yet somehow we're not able to take any gold lead until the 20-minute mark. Or not any substantial gold lead that was not being neutralized at any given point in time. This was fairly weird to me, given how consistent all of the laners had been at this given point. And Order really surprised me and slightly disappointed. If you're able to manage to keep this lead, like keep the gold fairly even across the board, again, in a composition that required time, why not really capitalize on the fact that G2 was also being rather slow on this situation? You found an opportunity to gain more leads, and instead of resetting, took a Baron play that was a little rushed, and it cost you a whole lot. Now, do I think that this could have, that them resetting and getting anything else would have gone anywhere significant? No. G2, like showing in this graph over here, had full control of nearly everything across the game. And because their composition was slightly easier to navigate overall, it's hard for me to think about even what that could have meant long term for Order. You would have to hope for a really horrendous team fight by G2 for their composition to work without any substantial lead done early in. But I think that's just a problem of how Karthus is being drafted. But we'll get to that point later in. Up next, we've got Evil Geniuses versus G2. The Evil Geniuses, the upstarts of North America. And this was a much cleaner game by G2, who, despite the slow build-up and a lack of gold being ballooned again, had a whole control of the map and tempo for sure. Evil Geniuses had a draft that required strong leads super early in, and since they never got to that point, it became clear that the matchup was just going to get rougher and rougher with time. There was this glimmer of hope with how Evil Geniuses found avenues to grab some map control, especially during the Baron play, which G2 was a little inefficient with. But it wasn't enough, as G2 still held all the cards during every moment of the game. So let's take a look at the gold graph and see what that means. Well, primarily here, first it looks similar to the Order versus G2 game. The biggest notable difference here is that Evil Geniuses are much better at navigating the neutral objectives than Order is. And that's not so surprising given the avenues and the kinds of teams that Evil Geniuses have to play against. The issue here is that Evil Geniuses clearly have a sense of how to slowly balloon the lead over time. Now, this isn't as sharp of a difference at the 20-minute mark where all of a sudden it's over, but given the slow, drawn-out, and very thoughtful process that G2 had, it's no surprise that they got the vast majority of the neutrals, and any neutrals that were being taken were likely off of resets more than anything else. In fact, I'm pretty sure all of them were. So, given these two games, and this is a fairly small sample size, right? Because we haven't seen what Evil Geniuses in Order get to play as, like what they're up against. We will get to see that tomorrow. It makes it very hard for me to see how G2 could fumble it unless Evil Geniuses get their act together and really focus on trying to get non-scaling compositions and get a very strong early game presence. Up next, we get the Turkish Istanbul Wildcats versus Royal Never Give Up from the LPL. And honestly, this was incredibly respectful and super by-the-books kind of game from RNG, who managed to subdue the early game out of Istanbul Wildcats and use the lead to balloon it super hard coming the mid-game, which is where they really specialize at. Not much to say outside of it being clean from them. For the Wildcats, however, they looked super timid for some reason, which is not expected. And I want to see the same kind of early aggression they are known for. Otherwise, they are just going to be left in the dust by the rest of this group. Like, I'm so bad. Was everybody else just kind of weirdly baffled by how quiet they were in the early game, as opposed to just like the very harsh aggression? They're not the strongest laners across the board for their region, and they're very rough around the edges, but they're never usually just kind of like taking it. They usually are aggressive. So let's take a look at the gold graph for what this means here. And like, it's just a slow burn. Like, this is a clean graph across the board. And the Wildcats do get the first blood really early in, but every neutral, the first turret, all the turret platings, not losing a single one, there's barely any avenue in which the Wildcats were given to be able to end the game. And by the time they took Baron, like by the time Royal Never Give Up got the Baron, it was just a matter of ending the game right there. It was kind of baffling for me to just see the Wildcats, who are not by any stretch of the imagination a late game team. They are very much a get the early lead and quickly just die slow and painfully until the 20-minute mark and then just gone. Here's to hoping at least they're a little bit more aggressive against the rest of their group. Well, we'll see. And the last game of the day, we had the Brazilian Red Canids Kalunga versus the Paris Saint-Germain Talons from the PCS. And so many people, especially the commentators, were surprised by the weird play of Paris Saint-Germain. Now, granted, the on-paper expectation was definitely what people were supposed to expect, right? But, and I'm not going to be, this is not something that I kept repeating it, the playoffs from the Paris Saint-Germain Talons, from the Talons, were not what they're used, like who they are on a regular basis. And I was really afraid that was the kind of form they were going to carry on. Now, Red played a spectacular game today with a clean execution and managed to also improve during the game. A super example of this is the vision play that started off a little lackluster from them, but by the time the mid to late game arrived, it was flawless. Incredible execution of their vision play. And I'm genuinely surprised by the Talons, as they didn't do much at all to counteract the tempo that Red had. Because, and nor did they do anything to minimize the gold lead that was rapidly getting out of hand. The Talons lost, and are looking more and more like their playoff selves instead of their regular season selves. And again, the casters kept repeating it, that this is a super surprise that this was going to happen. I'm surprised by how efficient the Canids were. Red Canids are by all means an incredibly scrappy team that doesn't know when to die. But this was incredibly clean. This was a 13-0 game all the way across. Let's just take a look at the graph for this. And just to put a finer point on this, this is a full control by the time the 11-minute mark hits, right? Now, neutral controls are not huge on the set of the Red Canids. Cool, that's fine. But they did recognize that they had a stronger chance at holding the Heralds, and so they go for it. And while the Talons still managed to grab some neutrals, if you look at the timing of these neutral objectives, the dragons that are being taken, they're always, in terms of resets or as a sort of second place win from it, right? And it's such a reactive style of play from the Talons that I'm honestly still not used to seeing them play as. And even if people expected this reactive style of the Talons to be still better than the Red Canids, that doesn't stop the fact that the Canids still recognize that they were going to be an incredibly passive team and bulldoze through them like no tomorrow. This is such a one-sided affair that should have never been one-sided. But honestly, kudos to the Red Canids, who executed a draft flawlessly across the board. And even while losing the first turret or 2 dragons, didn't matter across the game, because it was getting lost in situations where they were trading up at any given point. So kudos to them. Fantastic. So what are my thoughts for the day? Honestly, this was a fairly fun day. I don't think the games were of any super high quality. It was a lot of one-sided affairs. And that's totally fine. Right? The first day, a lot of teams are still figuring stuff out, and the teams that are fairly obvious, or not so obvious at the time, are going to get a lot of practice from it. Right? It's just matter of fact, we're going to get the whole thing going. Easy peasy. A couple of things that I thought were super interesting, though, from the transition of 12.5 to 12.8 were the increase of early game based compositions. A lot of the games are fast, and the drafting reflected a lot of this control over the early game to make sure that they have the solid grasp of the map as soon as possible. And I thought that was super cool. I like fast games. Fast games, regardless of how snowbally they feel, usually emphasize a set of skills that are largely ignored, which is how to get as many leads as you can in the early game. I'm very happy to see Lucian being pivoted towards the bot side and not as a flex. The return of Graves Jungle is a nice inclusion. I'm very fond of the idea that we're heading towards more of a Bruiser-ish type of meta for the junglers. It means that fast clearing is great and all, but if we're going to be navigating anything and we're trying to skirmish a lot, it isn't an avenue of can you gank or can you farm. This should be like we're doing a hybrid of the two, and whatever you decide is based off of what you want to, like how you want to navigate the team. And usually farming Bruiser junglers, solid. I did think it was really strange that Karthus was being brought out, not because of the pick himself, but because of the drafts that were being picked for him. So to be more specific, he was brought into 2 games, if I'm remembering this correctly. Yes, here we go. He was in, he was in 2 games. He was in both G2 games where their opponents picked it. And both of the times they fell into the mistake of picking things that require early game control. So their solo laners having Aatroxes in it with like a Yone. And honestly, the solo laners require a solid set of like assistance right off the bat that was never there for some reason. It should have been like how do I explain this? Why pick a jungler that's just going to be hyper farming up until 15 minutes before there's any teamfight interaction from them, but have 2 solo laners that excel in skirmishes and in contesting early neutrals? There's a disconnect to the way that those drafts work, and I don't think it's necessarily an issue of like who of the pick itself necessarily being the problem, especially since like they chose the pick before and after in like 2 different respective games. Like the picks were being picked as blind to the jungle and as response to the jungle, so it's whatever. But I don't understand why you would pick your solo laners that way knowing that you're going to be picking that jungler, or that you would pick your jungler that way knowing what your solo laners are going to be. Like, why, either way of the case, why not pick something more proactive? Why not pick something that would have a lot more ganking potential and things that could enable your laners instead of just being kind of with zero zero presence within the map? It felt very bizarre as a choice. So I wouldn't expect it to show up more often, but if it does show up more often, I bet you it'll be with much more passive lanes against another jungler that is also farming heavily. But we'll see. It really depends on like how the meta evolves and things change over time. That's at least my understanding of what's going on from this. I also thought it was super interesting the number of karma bans. It's not a huge amount. Remember, the day ones, the sample sizes are not great. But there's a number of karma bans, and given the amount of times that there was like Nami being picked, again, 2 games, again, day 1 samples or whatever, showed a more understanding of wanting to siege more and having a lot more enchanters. There seems to be a lot more variety regarding enchanter supports versus engage supports / tanky supports, and I'm here for it. I really am curious what the read is from a bunch of these teams to see how they want to approach their bot lane duos going in, as there's going to be a lot more lethality, skirmish heavy marksmen being drafted, as there's been 0 jinxes across the board. There was like one Xayah ban in this entire thing. Hold on, let me just take a look here. Where is it? Yeah, there was one Xayah pick, and it was a ban. So most of the old bottom lane meta is gone from 12.5, at least given day one. So here's to see what happens. Those are my thoughts, at least. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down below. Let me know your comments. Let me know your thoughts in those comments. If you enjoy this kind of content, leave a like and subscribe. And I really appreciate the love from the recent videos that I've been getting. It's been fun interacting with a bunch of you who have had really awesome thoughts regarding your respective teams and regions that are coming in. They've been super insightful, at least to hear more voices from those regions. Really loved it. With that, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow for the next episode of Clearing Vision MSI 2022 edition. Bye.